Players community, this is Jeff Cranford, and I have the privilege and a unique privilege to be here with not only with the senior editor, which many of you get through the daily devotional, my longtime good friend Dennis Darville, but also Boo Arnold, who is one of our area directors and working down in Texas, and we're here in La Quinta for some staff meetings and some board overlap and retreat stuff. And some things came up today, both through a sermon I preached this last week, some things that Dennis presented today, and what's been on Boo's heart for a long time in terms of doing ministry with groups of men, and even there in San Antonio where you live, Boo. So I just want to throw open this first question. And number one, it's two questions always we have to ask is, who are we? And then secondly, why in the world are we here? And there's a narrative in your mind, and Dennis was talking about this, I want to ask you, Dennis, there's a narrative in everyone's mind about some kind of story. We live in some kind of story, and then some people say, no, we just create our own story, or is there a story? I know that's been heavy on your mind lately, Dennis, as you've, over the last few years, to think about narrative. Is there a meta-narrative, or is there not?
Well, as Christians, we think there absolutely is a meta-narrative, and it's because God's broken into the world and told us who He is and what our purposes are, and that's all found in Scripture, both Old and New Testament, right? But since, really the 60s, at least in America, academic scholars, skeptical, academic, largely atheistic scholars have argued, the famous line by Leotard was, there's an incredulity towards meta-narratives. In other words, I doubt that there's any such thing as an overarching storyline. But just for one quick example, right after World War II, Dorothy Sayers, who was a contemporary of J.R.R. Tolkien and close friends with C.S. Lewis, a literary giant in her own right, was writing, and she at one point simply said, "We have quite forgotten that Christianity is an interpretation of the universe." So as Christians, it's quite clear that the Judeo-Christian story, the big story, the true story of the world, has shaped the West and shaped America. And now we are actually abandoning that in large ways. And what Francis Schaeffer would say about where we are right now is that we are a cut flower. We have cut ourselves away from our storyline.
Which sounds a lot like what Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branch. You, apart from me, you can do nothing. So trying to create a story for your life apart from the centrality of Jesus is suicidal. It's spiritual suicide, which is why Paul says you're dead. People are dead because we're cut off from the very life force of our Creator. Now, Boo, you've seen this a lot, especially with men, and you have some concerns. Boo spent a lot of time in Hollywood, about 15 years, and you just saw this. Everybody had everything, and this was kind of the life, and yet they had nothing. Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, what is this story that we're missing?
Well, story's important. There's probably not anything more painful than meaninglessness, to not know why you're here, what your purpose is. I mean, there's no direction with it. You're aimless. And that has a real devastating effect on the mind and the emotions. And I think that's why, I think during COVID, a lot of people were forced to stop and think, consider, who am I? We weren't running around. And I think it overwhelmed a lot of younger people. That's why we see depression and suicide rates jumping. But it comes down to, the four big questions. My friend Jim Barker is always pushing the four big questions, My origin, where did I come from? My purpose, why am I here? If I know that, then that indicates there's a value system that I need to live by. And more importantly, what's my destiny? Where am I? Is there any hope that, I've got 4 kids. I'm going to have to say bye to them one day. That's going to be tough. Do I offer them any hope? Or is that it? Am I saying bye forever? Well, the overarching meta-narrative answers these questions for us. It tells us why humans were put on the planet, what happened to them, what needed to happen to redeem them and save them, and then the great promise of restoration. Revelation 21, no more tear. That warms my heart, man. Because there's a lot of tears in the world. A lot of tears.
So much. So here's what I want to do. Next Friday, I want to talk more about the story. Let's just find more of the story. So now we've established that there is a story, or at least Jesus said there is a story in which you fit back in. Dennis, next week I want to talk to you a little bit about Genesis 1 through 4 and how it kind of sets a prologue, in a sense, for the entirety of the Bible. And then, Boo, I want to ask you a few more questions. So I hope this is sparking some interest. Many of you struggle to go into your golf community, to go into your group and say, well, I don't really know what to say. I've asked Bob to come to the Bible study 10 times. He says no. And, how do we get him? I hear that all the time. How do we get him? Well, simple questions like, hey, do you realize you're part of a story, or little things like that? But first, we have to understand the story and not be uninformed that, in fact, we are part of a greater story. So we'll do that next week.